My name is Samantha. I'm 32 years old and the chief financial officer at a major corporation in New York. For 7 years of marriage, I truly believed I was living in a good family, one where love and trust were built day by day. Until that morning. I was getting ready to leave our penthouse apartment overlooking the Hudson River when a call from attorney Michael Harris shattered the world I thought I was standing on. My husband, Richard, had secretly filed for divorce attached with a document transferring all of our assets, bearing a forged signature in my name. A few hours later, I realized what he took wasn't just money. It was complete control over my life. Have you ever trusted the wrong person so deeply that you lost yourself in the process? Leave a comment if you've ever experienced the shock of betrayal. Hit like if you believe women are strongest when they stand alone. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because what Richard did to me was just the beginning. I sat frozen in the chair, my phone still face down on the table as if touching it would make everything collapse for real. Morning light streamed through the thin curtains of the home we once called ours, but today it felt colder than ever. I don't remember how long I sat there. All I know is that Michael Harris's voice kept echoing in my head. We need you to respond within 10 days regarding the divorce petition and asset division agreement. As requested by Mr. Richard Keller. 10 days. My husband, the man who still slept next to me every night, who still asked what kind of coffee I wanted each morning, had quietly planned to erase me from his life. No warning. No conversation. Just a cold document from a stranger with a law degree. That afternoon when Richard came home, I was still sitting on the sofa in the living room. He stepped in, took off his coat, and glanced at me like everything was perfectly normal. Something wrong? He asked, setting his briefcase on the table. I stood up, my voice dry. Is there something you'd like to tell me, Richard? He paused for a moment, then sighed and loosened his tie. Samantha, we both knew this was coming eventually. What exactly? I nearly shouted. Are you talking about filing for divorce behind my back? Or about asking me to sign over my assets like I'm a paid housekeeper? Richard didn't meet my eyes. He walked past me, poured himself a glass of water, like he needed a moment to get back into character. Then he said one line, like it had been rehearsed for weeks. It's over. I let out a bitter, dry laugh. Over since when, Richard? Before or after you signed the divorce papers? Before or after you started transferring money out of our joint account? He turned to look at me with a calmness that chilled me to the bone. I'm not obligated to report every expense to you. We're married. Sure, he replied. But that doesn't mean you own me or my accounts. It felt like being slapped not with a hand, but with brutal indifference. I didn't say another word. I went straight to the bedroom, grabbed my laptop, and opened our online banking site. My hands trembled as I typed in the password, but I got through. Our joint account was empty. I stared at the transaction history in silence. For the past 6 weeks, there had been transfers almost every week, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, all to an unfamiliar abbreviated account. Not big enough to raise alarms individually, but together they totaled nearly $120,000. My heart raced. I switched to my personal savings account, the one he didn't have access to. Still intact. But at this point, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I walked back into the living room. Richard was watching the news as if nothing had happened. I want to know, I said from behind him, where you transferred the 24 money. He didn't turn around. You're tense, Samantha. We can talk about this later. No. Now. He set the remote down, turned to face me, and his eyes were colder than I'd ever seen. You want the truth? Fine. I transferred the money to my own account. One under my company's name. Everything's legal. I have the right. You can't touch it. I took half a step back. What company? You don't own a company. Richard smirked. You really think I'd live my whole life in my wife's shadow? At that moment, I didn't know what hurt more, losing the money, losing my husband, or realizing the man who once held me every night had spent months planning to erase me from his life like a line item in a business deal. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just turned, walked into the bedroom, closed the door, and leaned against it. Everything around me was collapsing in slow motion. I reopened my work emails and pretended life was going on. But inside, there was only emptiness. The only question repeating in my mind was, when did I start living with a stranger I still called my husband? I didn't sleep for 3 nights straight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard sitting there, casually admitting everything as if I were just a number in the spreadsheet he was wiping clean. I didn't cry, but the pain quietly ate away at me hour by hour. Like what I'd truly lost wasn't just money, it was the part of me that once trusted without question. I started retracing every detail. I downloaded the last 3 months of our bank statements. I didn't trust my memory anymore. I needed evidence, something clear, concrete, undeniable. And then, on page 7 of the statement, a name jumped out: Rachel Meyer. A wire transfer for $12,000, marked as business consultant. I'd never once heard Richard mention anyone named Rachel. This company he supposedly started had never shown up in any of the documents I'd seen. I sat frozen for minutes, staring at the name like it might explain itself. Who was Rachel Meyer? Why was Richard transferring that much money to her? And why was it all so hidden? I opened LinkedIn and searched her name. Dozens of results, but only one lived in New York, close to Richard's office. Her profile photo showed a woman in her 30s with bright blonde hair and a confident smile. Her title: Independent Brand Strategist helping startups scale and secure funding. I scrolled down to her posts. 2 weeks earlier, she had posted a photo taken at a high-end French restaurant in Manhattan. 2 glasses of wine, a plate of foie gras, and the caption: Some people invest in stocks, others invest in vision. Thank you for believing in me. Number partnership. Number new beginnings. I zoomed in on the photo. Reflected faintly in the restaurant window behind her was a man smiling, leaning in slightly. The image wasn't clear, but I recognized those shoulders. Richard. Cold spread down my spine. Part of me wanted to believe it was just a business dinner. But the other part, the one that had lived with Richard long enough to know when his eyes had changed, already knew the truth wasn't on the menu that night. The next day, I got to the office earlier than usual. I told my assistant I needed a quiet morning with no interruptions. Once the door closed, I pulled out my phone, took a deep breath, and called Lisa, a friend from college who now worked in internal investigations at a major bank. Lisa, I need your help running a background check on someone. Rachel Meyer. There might be some suspicious transfers connected to her. Lisa was silent for a moment. Are you okay, Samantha? I'm not sure, but I need to know if she's ever been investigated for financial misconduct. Or at least if she has any shady business connections. Send me her email address and account number if you have them. I'll run a check through the system. I sent everything I had. Late that afternoon, Lisa called me back. Rachel was previously listed as a financial advisor for a shell company in Jersey. That company was shut down for tax violations within 3 months. And the person listed as the legal representative of that company, she paused, was Richard Keller. I let the phone fall onto the table. My heart was pounding like thunder. Richard hadn't just betrayed me in marriage, he had built an entire financial operation behind my back, funneling money through someone with a history of fraud. That evening, when Richard came home, I was sitting at the dining table, printed documents from Lisa spread out in front of me. He saw them, hesitated for a second, then slipped right back into his usual confident composure. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice calm. I stared straight into his eyes. "Who is Rachel Meyer?" Richard didn't blink. "A strategic consulting partner. Who's been investigated for money laundering? Whose company is legally tied to your name?" I threw the file toward him. "You really thought I wouldn't know how to trace this?" His expression shifted. The polished version of Richard vanished. What replaced it was sharp, cold, and visibly unsettled. "I did everything to protect my assets before you could make your move," he said slowly, enunciating every word. "You think I didn't know what you were planning behind my back?" I gave a bitter laugh. "You actually thought I wouldn't uncover the fact that you and your mistress were siphoning off the fortune I spent my entire life building?" Richard stood silent, but his eyes no longer dodged mine. I saw something in him I'd never seen before: hostility. That was when I realized this wasn't just about money. This was about dignity, about justice, about taking back control of my life from the man who used love as a cover for betrayal. And Rachel, that unfamiliar name, was just the beginning of what was coming. I began tracking Richard's every move like a new habit. Not because I wanted to live in suspicion, but because I refused to stay in the dark. Every answer lay within him and I needed them, piece by piece. Richard usually left the house on Tuesday and Friday nights, always saying he had meetings with partners. These meetings ran late into the night, and when he came home he was quiet, avoided eye contact like silence had been carefully rehearsed. I let it all play out, pretending to trust him, pretending not to notice the unfamiliar perfume on his shirt or the faint lipstick stains on wine glasses in the sink. That Friday night, I had just come home from the office, kicked off my shoes, hadn't even washed my face when Richard announced he had to go. I smiled and wished him a productive meeting, just like always. As soon as the door closed, I waited silently for a few minutes, listening for his Lexus to pull out of the underground parking. Then I headed straight to his office. I had never gone through Richard's things before. But tonight I wasn't his wife, I was a woman stepping into a battlefield. His computer was on, just locked. The password hadn't changed, the name of his favorite college football team. I typed it in, palms sweaty. The screen lit up. I found a folder titled Admin. Too vague to draw attention, but too out of place to belong to any real project. I opened it, heart pounding. Inside were dozens of documents, many of them password protected. But one file sat unguarded, like someone had saved it in a rush and forgotten it. The file name, Meyer Plan Div Final. Docs. I opened it. The contents unfolded line by line, each sentence cutting into me like a blade. Phase 1. Create secondary account. Gradually transfer funds from joint account, keep each transaction under $10,000 to avoid detection. Phase 2. Establish Rachel as CEO of shell company. Route funds as consulting fees to legitimize flow. Phase 3. Prepare divorce filing. Ensure Samantha suspects nothing. Move primary assets before official notice. Phase 4. Request 50% of remaining joint assets and file for financial support. Cite marital dependency. Leverage media influence if necessary. I couldn't breathe. My hands were ice cold. My chest felt crushed. Richard had planned, step by step, to strip me of everything, every dollar I saved, every contract I signed. He wasn't just leaving me. He wanted to annihilate me financially, and with it, my name. I kept scrolling to the end of the document. A note exchange appeared, likely written by Rachel herself. You need to make sure she doesn't suspect anything until the paperwork is finalized. If she finds out early, the entire plan collapses. I've secured a lawyer ready to notarize documents, just bring her to the signing location on schedule. This wasn't just betrayal. This was organized fraud. My stomach churned. A wave of nausea climbed into my throat. They weren't just lying behind my back. They had turned me into a target, a walking wallet. I carefully copied the file to a USB drive and emailed an encrypted version to my personal account. I knew I couldn't confront them head-on just yet. But I also knew I couldn't afford to wait in silence any longer. That night, when Richard returned home, I had already laid out a pillow on the sofa. He looked at me, paused, then as always put on his blank face. "You're not sleeping in the bedroom?" he asked. I looked at him for a long moment. "No," I said. "I need space tonight." He nodded. "I understand." I didn't say another word. I climbed onto the sofa bed, pulled the thin blanket up to my neck, eyes wide open in the dark. Behind the bedroom door, the man I once loved was calmly plotting the death of a version of me, the woman who once believed in marriage, in respect, in the meaning of a promise made for life. And in that moment, I understood more clearly than ever before. This wasn't a fractured marriage. This was war. And I, Samantha Keller, was not going to be the one buried in silence. The next morning, I made an appointment with Patricia Langford, a financial attorney who had represented several high-profile clients in complex divorce cases. Her office was on the 13th floor of a glass building in Midtown. When I walked in, the anger inside me still simmered, but my expression was calm. I wasn't there to vent. I was there to fight. Patricia invited me to sit in a leather chair and gently closed the glass door behind her. She didn't beat around the bush. After I laid everything out, from the secret accounts to the plan I found on Richard's computer, she nodded and pulled a fountain pen from her blazer pocket. We're not going to react emotionally, she said, eyes fixed on the documents. We're going to respond with the law. I nodded. I want to reclaim every legally owned asset. And I want proof that he committed intentional fraud. Patricia looked up. We'll need a complete financial profile. That includes all accounts under your name and every asset before and during the marriage. Have you ever held any contracts independently? I have 2 investment properties I bought before we got married. And a trust fund my mother set up in my name. Excellent. She jotted a quick note. What about marital assets? I've been the primary contributor. Over 80% of the funds for our current home came from my personal income, before we got married. Her eyebrows lifted. We'll need tax returns. And bank statements going back at least 3 years. I nodded. I'll send them by the end of today. Patricia leaned back in her chair. With what you've got, especially Richard's divorce plan, we can absolutely build a solid counterclaim. If the court finds he intentionally concealed assets, any 50-50 split agreement goes out the window. I exhaled slowly. For the first time in days, I saw a flicker of light cutting through the storm. I wasn't alone. I had the law. I had the truth. We spent the entire morning mapping out a strategy, freezing any funds not yet transferred, filing a request for retroactive auditing on Richard's transactions, and initiating a claim for marital asset fraud. I left the office with a long to-do list, but my heart felt lighter. That evening, just as I walked through the door, I saw Richard sitting in the living room, shirt partially unbuttoned, a glass of wine in hand, wearing the same indifferent look as if we were still just a normal couple on a quiet night. He looked at me and placed the glass down. We need to talk. I stood still, my gaze cold. I have nothing to say. He slowly got up, walking closer. I know you're planning something. I just wanted to warn you. I cut him off. No, Richard. I'm the one who's warning you. The silence between us snapped like a wire under tension. Then he gave a faint smirk. Then I suppose the next letter you receive will be quite a surprise. The next morning I was at my desk when my phone buzzed. It was a call from Richard's attorney's office. I answered, and the voice on the other end was polite but razor-sharp. Miss Keller? We're calling to inform you that our client has filed a civil lawsuit against you for financial misconduct within the marriage. We'll be delivering the documentation to your legal representative today. I froze. I'm sorry? Financial misconduct? That's correct. There's evidence you transferred a significant amount of assets out of joint accounts without notification or consent. I gripped the phone tightly. The assets I transferred were from my personal account. We'll let the court decide. I hung up. My lips were dry. Bitterness swelled in my chest. Richard didn't just want to steal from me, he wanted to turn me into the villain. A greedy woman. A liar. Someone to be shamed. I rushed to Patricia's office. She had already received the copy of the lawsuit and was flipping through it, her face unreadable. He's going for the preemptive strike, she said. Trying to accuse you before we can expose him as the actual fraud. I sank into the chair, my palms freezing. Can we hit back? Patricia smiled faintly. We won't hit back. We'll prove he lied. And when all the evidence is laid out, he'll pay the price for defamation. I sat silently, breathing deep. The battle had officially begun. And I knew I couldn't afford to lose. Not for the money, but for my name. Because I wouldn't let the man who once held my hand under candlelight vows turn me into a twisted version of myself in the story he wanted to tell. I never imagined that in just 3 days, everything could spin this fast. Patricia had barely finished assuring me we'd expose Richard when another email from his legal team came in. Attached was a nearly 10-page file, a summary of the financial evidence they were preparing to submit for the preliminary hearing. I sat beside Patricia, clutching the edge of my coat as she opened the document. From the first page, my blood ran cold. Bank statements in my name showing regular weekly transfers, large amounts to an unlisted account. The transaction description showed the name Meyer Consulting Group, with a note underneath, Strategic Personal Development Consulting. I immediately pushed back. I've never made any transfers like this. Those aren't real statements. Patricia glanced at me, then carefully scanned the details. She didn't say a word, just moved the cursor down to the transaction timestamps. And right there, I saw something that made my whole body go numb. The transactions were time-stamped on Tuesday afternoons, the exact windows when I was always in weekly scheduled meetings at the office. If you didn't know better, you'd believe I had purposefully moved money to a company under Rachel's name. I didn't do this, I said again, this time my voice trembling. I don't know what these transfers are. I've never signed or authorized anything like this. Patricia placed a hand on the table, thoughtful. Richard forged this. He may have used a copied signature, or, if he had access to your digital accounts, all he'd need was one of your old devices to make it look legit. Then it hit me. The old tablet I used early in our marriage, the one I'd nearly forgotten about, probably buried somewhere in the bookshelf. Richard could have easily used it to access my accounts without my knowledge. I sat there frozen, every cell in my face tightening. Richard wasn't just one step ahead. He was months, maybe years ahead. He knew my routines, how I saved things, when I let my guard down, and he used it all against me. Patricia spoke slowly, each word measured. We'll need to hire a data forensic expert to verify the origin of the transactions and the authenticity of the digital signatures. But the critical point is, if the court doesn't grant us sufficient time to investigate, we'll be pushed into a defensive corner. I looked at her. And if they believe him? Then you could be charged with misappropriation of marital assets and face a full freeze of your accounts. I stood up, pacing the room, my head pounding. I wasn't just losing ownership. I was being turned into a criminal in my own story. My phone buzzed. A message from Lucy, my trusted assistant at the company. What's going on? I just heard from a partner that Richard's been spreading rumors you used the company for personal money laundering. I gripped the phone, my nails digging into my skin. It felt like someone had just plunged me into cold water. He's coming for my reputation, I whispered. He doesn't just want the money. He wants to destroy me at the root. Patricia nodded. He knows you're respected in your industry. If he tarnishes your name, he's hoping you'll settle just to end it quickly. But Samantha, if you collapse now, he'll destroy everything. I sat back down and took a deep breath. So what do I do? We counterattack, but with precision. I'll contact a data forensic specialist today. You need to track down every old device you've used to access any financial accounts. Every mobile device, tablet, phone. And, she paused, locking eyes with me. You need to be stronger than ever. The court won't deal with emotion. It only deals with evidence. And we need time to build the proof that you're innocent. I nodded. In my mind, every memory of what was once called a peaceful marriage melted away like snow under the sun. The man who once held my hand on our wedding day was now gambling with my future in exchange for his freedom. And if I didn't stand firm, I'd lose everything. Not just the money, but myself. The meeting took place on a Wednesday afternoon, not at a law office or some sterile conference room, but at a quiet little cafe tucked away in the West Village, the place we used to go when we first started dating. Richard had picked the location. I agreed, though part of me already knew he hadn't asked me there with any good intentions. When I arrived, Richard was already seated, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, looking like a man worn down by a long day. But I knew better than anyone, with Richard, every detail was calculated. He gestured for me to sit, sliding a pre-ordered cup of coffee toward me. I didn't touch it. We don't have to keep hurting each other, Sam, he said, voice low and steady. I don't want the money. I just want freedom. I stared him straight in the eyes. Freedom from what? The wife you promised to protect, or from your own cowardice? Richard didn't flinch. He leaned back, folding his hands. I admit I've made some mistakes. But this has gone too far. We should stop before we both lose. I stayed silent. He was playing a new role, the mature man, willing to own up, ready to walk away. But his eyes hadn't changed. Still the same cold stare that had signed the false lawsuit accusing me of stealing our assets. Then drop the lawsuits, I said. You claim you don't want the money. Prove it. He pressed his lips together, let out a small laugh. I just need assurance everything ends peacefully. You know, the system's not exactly fair to men. I stood up without another word. There was nothing left to discuss. And I hadn't come to hear Richard preach about so-called unfairness. Back at the office, I opened my laptop and checked the investment accounts Patricia had told me to monitor closely. In less than 4 hours since my last login, a new transaction had appeared. One of the personal investments listed under my name, nearly $600,000, had been moved out. The recipient, a newly opened account under an LLC named RSM Strategic Holdings. My face went pale. That name had never shown up in any prior documents. And based on the transaction code, the transfer had been authorized from an old device, the tablet I once used and thought I had left behind in storage. I called Patricia immediately, barely keeping my voice level. He moved the money. He set up a new company, RSM Strategic Holdings, and transferred the entire investment over. Have you frozen the account? Patricia asked quickly. I'm doing it now. I launched the banking app and activated emergency lock mode, freezing all remaining funds. Any account that couldn't process withdrawals the same day would now be under 24-hour review control. Just minutes later, I received a notification. Another attempted transfer had just been blocked by the security lock. He was still trying to take the security. Rest. I sat motionless, my fingers clenched against the edge of the desk. Richard had just played the part of a man ready to let go. But the moment he left that cafe, he acted like a thief walking into an open vault. I've moved the rest into my risk mitigation investment fund, I told Patricia. It's a hedge fund I created 2 years ago. Registered solely under my name, separate from any marital accounts. Do you have documentation showing when you established the fund and the source of the capital? Yes. I'll send it right now. Patricia instructed me to gather every record tied to the fund formation documents, account verification, and proof that all money had originated from personal, non-marital assets. We needed to prove that everything I moved was legally mine. A few hours later, I returned to my apartment, and just as I stepped inside, my phone rang. It was Lucy. Samantha, Richard just showed up at the company. He demanded access to your internal files, saying he was your husband and a legal supporting shareholder. I froze. You refused him, right? Of course. I called security. But you need to be careful. It looks like he's trying to sabotage something. I hung up, walked to the dining table, and pulled out a chair. The apartment was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Richard said he didn't want the money, that was his line. But in reality, he was trying to take everything. The money, the reputation, the career, even the identity I once believed was untouchable. I texted Patricia. He knows. He's counterattacking. Her reply came in under a minute. Don't worry. So are we. I was driving home after a long day at the legal office when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered anyway. My instincts told me it was Richard. His voice came through low and gravelly, not rushed but sharp like cold steel. You think you're clever, Samantha? You really think you can outsmart me? Everything you just did, you'll pay for it. I promise. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I'm not obligated to listen to threats from someone like you. He laughed. Not a threat. A warning. You have no idea what's waiting for you. The call ended without another word. The phone still burned warm in my hand, but my whole body went cold. That wasn't just the bitterness of a man who had lost. It was the tone of someone who had laid the trap, baited the hook, and was now ready to strike the final blow. I arrived at the small bar in Soho right on time. Tom, a friend from college, now an operations director at a tech firm, was already waiting. We'd lost touch for years, but when he heard I was in trouble, Tom had reached out. You look better than I expected, he said as I approached. I sat down, offering a faint smile. It's just the outside. Inside, it feels like I'm running out of oxygen. Tom didn't ask anything right away. He waited for me to order a drink, then set his beer down and leaned forward. Sam, I've been hearing something from a few people on the partner side, the ones you used to work with. Apparently, Richard reached out to them a few months ago. I looked up. What kind of reach out? Anonymous emails. He sent them what appeared to be internal documents from your company. Said you were using investment funds for personal gain. That an internal investigation was coming. I felt my throat tighten. I know, they're skeptical too. But if a rumor spreads at just the right place and time, it becomes a stain that's hard to remove. I dropped my head into my hands, exhausted. He doesn't just want the money. He wants to destroy everything I've built. Tom gripped his glass tighter. He's not working alone. Mark Benson. You remember him? I looked up, my expression darkening instantly. Richard's best friend from high school. Corporate attorney, specializes in mergers and smoothing the road after high-profile divorces. Tom nodded. Right. Mark's the one behind those surgical filings so well-crafted they nearly knocked out your ability to respond. And I've heard he's coordinating with a journalist to release some so-called investigative report implying you laundered money through your company. I sat in stunned silence. For years I believed everything I'd built came from hard work, from market trust and client respect. I never imagined a few lines of edited text, a couple of altered figures, and anonymous emails could be enough to tear down the name I spent my life establishing. Tom, I don't even know where to begin anymore. I exhaled. Every time I build a wall, Richard finds a way to hit it from the back with a blow I couldn't see coming. Tom leaned back, his voice lowering. You don't need defense anymore. You need offense. I looked at him, half surprised, half doubtful. What do you mean? Hand over every piece of evidence you have to an independent investigative team. Apply for federal-level legal protection. And if necessary, drag Mark Benson into the light. I know someone who can help. I stayed quiet for a moment, then gave a small nod. When I left the bar, I walked along the sidewalk, the night wind of New York slicing through my coat collar. Richard's words echoed in my head from that phone call. You'll pay for this. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't dodging or hoping for peace. The game had shifted. The first hearing took place on a Monday morning, with the chill of late autumn in the air. I walked into court with steady steps, though my heart still pounded. Across the room, Richard sat beside Mark Benson, both dressed sharply, as if they were at a press conference instead of a legal war. He looked at me with a cold stare, like I was a piece that had outlived its use. Patricia sat beside me, her face unreadable. In her hands was a meticulously organized file, every piece of evidence and argument built over 3 nonstop weeks. I knew this was only the beginning, but if we didn't hold the line here, the direction of the entire case could turn against us. From the petitioner's side, Mark laid out the accusations with unnerving calm. That I used inside connections to move funds illegally. That I hid assets in an investment fund under another name. That I deliberately concealed income to avoid dividing it in the divorce. I didn't speak. I just listened carefully to every word. Patricia underlined one line, then stood and began dismantling each claim, sharp, cold, and confident. Your Honor, she began, every investment Mr. Keller mentions predates the marriage. This is the financial record from 2014 Miss Keller signed with an independent brokerage firm using exclusively her own funds, with no contribution or involvement from Mr. Keller. We have the notarized contract, the original records, and bank confirmations. I watched Richard's face. He tilted his head slightly and pressed his lips together. I saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes, too quick for him to hide. When the hearing ended, I stayed behind with Patricia to review our next move. She said, We've held the line, but we haven't struck decisively yet. He still thinks he's ahead. I nodded. Then we need a move that knocks him down so hard he doesn't get up again. 3 days later, hope came from the last place I expected. A witness. Becca, Mark Benson's former legal assistant, called Patricia's office and requested a private meeting. She said she no longer worked for Mark and had information about evidence manipulation in my case. We met at a small cafe in Brooklyn. Becca arrived carrying a slim document folder. She looked tense but determined. Mark pressured me to alter procedure, she said. He asked me to edit banking records, change transaction dates to make it look like funds had been illegally transferred from your account. I went still. Patricia leaned in, calm and focused. Can you prove that? She asked. Becca nodded. I saved the draft before editing. On a personal drive. And I have internal emails with date, time, and direct orders from Mark. I backed them up because I knew eventually I wouldn't survive under his shadow. I reached over and gently touched Becca's hand. My eyes filled with quiet gratitude. Thank you for choosing the truth. Becca hesitated. I'm not doing this just for you. I used to think I was protecting a client. But after I saw what he was trying to fabricate, I couldn't close my eyes anymore. The very next morning, Patricia filed all the evidence with the court, along with a petition to expand the investigation. We requested a full review of all materials Mark had submitted and moved to have him disqualified from representing Richard if misconduct was confirmed. When Richard and Mark found out, I received a short text from Richard. "You'll regret touching my people." I didn't reply. A few days later, in the next court session, Patricia presented the new files and Becca's sworn statement. The judge, a stern, older man, listened without blinking. After reviewing the side-by-side comparison of original and altered documents, he ordered all civil proceedings paused and announced a formal criminal inquiry into evidence tampering. Richard stood up, his face white as chalk. Mark said nothing, but I saw his hand clenched tightly into a fist. I sat still. No smile. No gloating. No bitterness. Just a calm settling in my chest, like a thick layer of dust had finally been wiped clean. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, I could see the light clearly ahead. And Richard no longer looked certain that he could control how this ended. I sat in Patricia's office, the late afternoon light filtering through the windows, casting a pale golden hue over the papers on her desk. Beside me was a file nearly 300 pages thick, which she had just closed. On the cover, bold print read, "Civil complaint for defamation and financial fraud against Richard Keller and Rachel Meyer." "I don't want to just defend myself anymore, Patricia," I said, my voice steady. "I want them to face justice the way I had to face the shame of being set up." Patricia looked at me and nodded. "I know you're strong enough to see this through. And this time, we won't just block their attacks, we're going to strike back." The very next day, the complaint was filed with the Manhattan District Court. I sued Richard for falsely accusing me of embezzlement, spreading misinformation to ruin my reputation and career. I sued Rachel as his accomplice for forging documents and participating in financial fraud. I demanded compensation for reputational, emotional, and financial damage, as well as the career opportunities they had deliberately destroyed. That afternoon, I officially broke the silence. I posted the truth on my personal social media, just one post. No dramatics. No long explanations. I simply wrote, "When a man tries to destroy the woman who once shared his bed and dreams, he doesn't just lose a wife, he loses the right to be called a decent human being." I stayed silent out of respect, but when silence is mistaken for weakness, the truth must speak. This is my story. And I'm ready to tell it in any courtroom, to anyone. Attached was a notarized excerpt of the complaint. Within 1 hour, the post had been shared thousands of times. My inbox flooded like a broken dam. Old friends, colleagues, even people who once believed in Richard began asking questions. They looked at me differently now. No longer the silent victim. I had become the narrator of my own story. Richard didn't wait long. Just 2 days later, his law firm filed a response, denying all allegations, requesting dismissal of the case, and even demanding I compensate him for damaging Mr. Keller's reputation in the investment sector. I scoffed when I read that line. Patricia only shook her head and said evenly, "A wounded animal lashes out harder. But it also shows you where it's weak." We kept gathering evidence and witnesses. Becca, Mark's former assistant, agreed to testify. An independent financial analyst confirmed the transfer records Richard used to accuse me were forged. More importantly, a senior investment partner from my company, one of the people who had received the anonymous email attacking me, agreed to testify that the claims were completely false and traced back to an IP address linked to Rachel. The preliminary hearing took place 3 weeks later. In the courtroom, Richard wore a gray suit, hair slicked back, his face rigid as I walked in. Beside him, Rachel sat still, her eyes never once meeting mine. Maybe she hadn't expected to be dragged into the battle she once thought was just a shadow play. Patricia presented the case like a perfectly arranged chessboard. Every email, every altered timestamp, every cover-up, every deliberate act of sabotage. When the technical analyst took the stand, I saw Richard lean back, eyes half shut, like he was hoping it was all just a dream. Then I was called to the stand. Under the courtroom lights, in the thick silence, I recounted every detail, from that first call from a strange lawyer, to the unusual transactions, the midnight threats, and the final betrayal named RSM Holdings. I didn't shed a single tear. My voice was clear, not shaky, not angry but steady with the weight of someone who had been pushed to rock bottom and climbed out alone. Richard's attorney tried to undermine me, questioning my motives, suggesting I was fabricating a story out of romantic revenge. But when Becca took the stand calmly confirming her testimony and producing the original emails exchanged with Mark Benson, the room fell into a heavy silence. Behind me, Patricia leaned in and whispered, "Direct hit. He's got nowhere left to run." The judge didn't issue a ruling that day, but everyone in that courtroom could feel it. Richard wasn't in control anymore. He was clinging to a crumbling illusion of power. As I stepped out of the courthouse that day and the doors closed behind me, the early winter sunlight hit my face bright but not harsh. I took a deep breath, not because I felt relieved, but because I knew that from this moment on every lie would have to face the light. And I wasn't following anymore. I was leading and they knew it. That morning, light rain fell. Droplets traced slow patterns down the courtroom windows like the heartbeat of a soul that had been wounded too long. I sat upright, hands on my lap, eyes fixed on the judge's bench. Across from me, Richard's navy tie looked too tight, his neck red with strain. Rachel kept her head down, hands wringing in her lap. The judge flipped to the final page of the file, paused as if letting the weight of it all settle. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking behind the wall. Having thoroughly reviewed the evidence, witness testimony, and expert documentation, the judge said, "The court hereby dismisses all allegations brought by Mr. Richard Keller against Mrs. Samantha Keller." He paused, then continued, "Furthermore, the court finds Mr. Richard Keller and Miss Rachel Meyer guilty of deliberate financial fraud and defamation, resulting in serious harm to Mrs. Samantha Keller's professional and legal interests. The court orders full financial restitution from Mr. Keller and Miss Meyer, and refers their actions for federal investigation regarding document falsification." I didn't react. My heart didn't race. My lips didn't smile. I just closed my eyes for a moment to let my entire being absorb that moment, not out of victory, but because I no longer had to prove I was a victim. Patricia placed a hand gently on my shoulder. She didn't say anything. Her small nod was enough to tell me we had made it through logic, through resilience, through truth. Outside the courthouse, a small group of reporters waited. Cameras lifted as I walked by, but I didn't stop. I hadn't come to build an image. I came to reclaim the justice that was mine. 3 days later, the official documents restoring my full ownership investment portfolios, retirement accounts, and real estate previously frozen arrived at my office. The header read, "Full Ownership Reinstatement, Ruling Number 39CV842. I opened the envelope and saw my name in familiar italic print, and I went still inside. Not because of the numbers, but because I had finally reclaimed something far more valuable: control over my own life. That evening, I sat alone on the balcony, sipping a glass of white wine. The rain had stopped. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement below, stretching into long streaks like memory threads. Inside me, everything replayed in slow motion. The sleepless nights, the cold phone calls, the tense courtrooms, the days I thought I'd never stand again. A message lit up my phone. It was from Lucy. "The company is restructuring. The board wants you back in the executive chair if you're ready." I didn't answer right away. I set the phone aside and closed my eyes. I wasn't thinking about what came next. I was simply here, no fear, no running. This battle took so much from me: my trust, relationships I once thought were forever. It stripped my most vulnerable parts bare before the public, the courts, and people I once knew. But in return, I learned how to rise from the wreckage, not to become tougher, but to become clearer with myself. A breeze passed through, carrying the scent of damp grass into my collar. I shivered slightly, but didn't go inside. I stayed there, wine still in hand. The sky above remained overcast. No stars in sight, but I no longer needed light from outside. Because now, I had found it within myself. Each of us, no matter how strong, has faced a moment when we were pushed to the edge, when trust was broken, when truth was twisted, and when the people we once called family became the ones who hurt us the most. I made it through that time not with anger, but with determination. By facing it head-on, reclaiming my voice, and refusing to let silence bury justice. What about you? Have you ever had to fight to take back what was once yours? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. I read every single message, because I believe every story holds a piece of truth worth hearing. If you'd like to continue following powerful journeys like this about family, about truth, about how we confront broken relationships, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Because family life, whether beautiful or full of trials, always holds untold stories, and we're here to tell them.